An enormous pitfall for revolutionary new movements and technologies is capture by the incumbent. This is the action of the pre-ante status quo stakeholders to use their ordinarily greater economic might to actually buy the upstart before it can unseat them from their hegemony. In many scenarios, this is actually the most likely outcome given the asymmetry of economic power between the old guard and the new upstart. We're already seeing this in crypto, and it shocked people very recently. But it looks like Cardano might be different.
Gotowi? Lecimy.
Today, we're going to discuss the recent allegations that JP Morgan owns critical Ethereum architecture. Yes, this could be that capture by the incumbent player we were just talking about. We'll talk about a brand new Budz website and a sign of a very rapidly maturing DeFi ecosystem in Cardano. If these videos are bringing you value each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. You probably saw or at least heard about this article from last week that sort of made the rounds across the crypto landscape, and it did ruffle a lot of feathers. So the title of this article is Consensus Lawsuit Reveals JP Morgan Owns Critical Ethereum Infrastructure. And of course, this is a pretty sensational title. What we're actually talking about is MetaMask. So let's be clear right from the start. There are many different wallets you could use in Ethereum. MetaMask is just one of them. But let's face it, this title to this article is probably getting a lot more hits than Consensus Lawsuit Reveals JP Morgan Owns one of many different possible wallets in Ethereum. So, and to be fair, what we're really talking about here is a lawsuit from a group of 35 shareholders of Ethereum giant Consensus. And of course, Consensus owns not just MetaMask, but also Infura, which is a node network. The article seems to be indicating that the lawsuit alleges some kind of a transfer of intellectual property, and it sounds like the intellectual property is related to MetaMask and Infura from one Consensus entity into another entity, and somehow this other entity is related to JP Morgan. As always, I'm not expressing any of this as fact. I'm just reading the article. But I don't think the details of the lawsuit are the important part. I think the important part is the set of two conclusions laid out in these two paragraphs right here. The article says both crypto wallet MetaMask and node network Infura persist as arguably the Ethereum ecosystem's most critical infrastructure. Turns out Wall Street fat cats JP Morgan directly profits from and even controls that infrastructure. So, obviously we haven't seen the facts that would substantiate whether or not JP Morgan directly profits from or even controls that infrastructure. But the first part we can kind of examine is a wallet like MetaMask critical infrastructure. Definitely it's infrastructure. You kind of need to use a wallet with what in the Cardano ecosystem we would call a dApp connector. Right now, there'd be like Nami wallet or CC Vault. In order to interact with smart contracts, you generally need a wallet like that, for most smart contracts. And the critical part is really the part that's in question here. If MetaMask is just one of many wallets, can we call it critical? I think usage is a relevant thing here. You could argue if something is so ubiquitous, if it's so pervasive, if everyone's using it, it might take on something that looks like criticality. That might become critical if everyone is using it. And it's hard to argue that MetaMask is not incredibly popular among people who use Ethereum smart contracts. This article, of course, comes on the heels of the news that MetaMask and Infura would be prohibiting users in certain nation states from using those two products, which surprised everybody. Everybody started asking questions about decentralization. And then immediately this article about JP Morgan comes out. It kind of reminds me of the quandary we're in with social media platforms. Everyone's saying, hey, the type of news that is either allowed or censored on social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, it's actually critical in the delivery of information to people. What news is allowed, what isn't, what facts are allowed, what facts are deemed misinformation. It's actually critical, while the owners of a lot of those platforms are arguing, hey, we built this platform, it's our platform, we can actually decide what we want to allow and what we don't. We're not a public utility, we're a private company, and we allow certain types of information to be conveyed on our platform and certain not. It's a little bit, it reminds me of the same situation. I mean, they have a good point. Under the laws of a lot of jurisdictions, they would certainly have the right to build, a platform of some type. A newspaper back in the old days could decide what news it wanted to publish and what news it didn't want to. And certainly different newspapers had different slants on different topics, different positions, and that was always kind of allowed. But the problem we're running into in this modern age is that certain social media platforms have become so ubiquitous that when they start censoring information, it actually has an impact that we couldn't have imagined previously, because the scale of these platforms is so large. If Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook all decide to censor certain information, it has a very large impact, much more than, say, a small municipal newspaper in 1973. So there is this scale issue. And whether or not you think that should make something critical or not, given that there are alternatives, certainly if you couldn't get some piece of information on Facebook, you could find another social media platform to put it on. But if all of the big social media platforms won't allow you to put any information on their sites, the scale becomes an issue, because the platforms that may allow you to may have a much smaller consumer base. So regardless of what you think, we do know that MetaMask is certainly a large scale product, not compared to Facebook, not compared to Twitter, not compared to YouTube, but in the world of crypto, usage of MetaMask is very high. And now we see allegations that JP Morgan may have some kind of an interest in MetaMask that people in crypto wouldn't like. And we can definitely say people in crypto wouldn't like it, because crypto, as the article points out, I mean, the Genesis block of Bitcoin said Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. The whole point was disintermediating these legacy financial institution players. And it's kind of a classic story, as we went through in the intro. Oftentimes when you have these upstart movements or upstart technologies, they're observed by the pre-ante status quo stakeholders, the incumbents, the parties or entities that already control a certain space. We can say that large banks like JP Morgan certainly have a certain amount of control over the financial sector, over what they do in the financial sector. And these types of incumbent players, they often notice these upstart revolutionary movements or technologies, and it's very common that they're going to have there's going to be this asymmetry of economic power. They're going to have much more economic power than the upstart. And instead of trying to fight this revolutionary new technology or movement, the best way to deal with it often, a pragmatic way to deal with it, is just to buy it. We've seen this in the past with social media platforms, with Facebook's, famously buying Instagram, things like that. And it was sort of inevitable that we would see this with entities in the financial sector and crypto. I don't know if any of us thought it would happen this fast and it would be something as pervasive as MetaMask, but it appears we've already reached that point. Of course, there's something we've seen all across the crypto landscape that's been very highly publicized, and that's VC ownership of not just projects and little pieces of infrastructure like MetaMask, but whole blockchains. And we've covered that quite a bit on this channel. But Cardano seems to be different. In Cardano, we notice a very serious aversion to things like VC funding or any kind of institutional money being involved in Cardano projects. Yes, they exist. There are very, very famous, very big, very popular Cardano products that received VC funding. Charles Hoskinson famously has his own VC fund because, hey, he's a billionaire and he wants to invest in projects too. But In Cardano, it seems to be more the exception than it is the rule. In tech in general, of course, many of our favorite products have been brought to us only because of the availability and existence of venture capital funding. But in Cardano, it seems to be the case that, yes, some of our important projects had to get VC funding in their early days, but it's not something that's celebrated and looked on with pride. It's just something that is sort of put up with. That may actually end up being our saving grace. While the JP Morgans of the world apparently are focused on blockchains like Ethereum, maybe they'll ignore Cardano. And when we get a little ways down the road, Cardano might be free of those types of influences, while the users of products and platforms and projects and blockchains that have received large amounts of this kind of institutional money, they might find themselves, not just a little bit worried because Venezuela has been banned, but worried because they've been limited from doing things that the JP Morgans of the world don't want them to do because it hurts their bottom line. Complying with sanctions against rogue states is one thing, but what if they decide that self-custody is too big a regulatory problem? Right now, people might be bemoaning the lack of inflows of money into the Cardano ecosystem, but in the future, not having to deal with the influences of those types of institutional entities might be a huge advantage for Cardano. More directly in the arena of Cardano news, we've got a few items. Here we have a tweet from Budz. Our new website is live at spacebuds.io. A lot of work went into this, but this is only the beginning. Let us know what you think of the website. Of course, this is a product of Alessandro's labors. He is the moving force behind Buds and also the Nami wallet. If we had an ecosystem full of Alessandros, I don't even know what you'd call it. It wouldn't even be an ecosystem anymore. It'd be something much more grandiose. But he says, here's the new Buds NFT website. I threw away the old code base and started completely from scratch, designed my own UI components, and focused on giving the website an app-like feeling so you can fluently go back and forth between pages and continue where you left off. This is pretty amazing. This is the kind of thing that I love about Cardano because as an ecosystem, we had to sort of start from scratch. We're the ecosystem that said, hey, we could easily do some kind of EVM compatible account balance thing. Instead, we're going to try to trailblaze this brand new EUTXO thing because we're that ecosystem. You've got a project like the Buds website, which isn't even that old. And the creator is already throwing away the entire code base and starting completely from scratch to build something better. I think it's this spirit of constantly improving and evolving that is also going to give Cardano a huge advantage in the years to come. The fact that we're not ever going to rest on our laurels. We're constantly going to be pushing forward. This is going to be a huge advantage, and it's going to accumulate. The more we do this, the better and better things are going to be. But this relentlessness is going to be a huge advantage for us. Speaking of evolving and maturing, SundaeSwap is letting us know yesterday 3 wallets were taken out of experimental. The SundaeSwap protocol now officially supports 5 wallets. Below, you can watch 3 examples performing swaps using Flint Wallet, Jera Wallet, and Card Wallet, the newest additions. Man, at the start of November, we didn't even have a DEX. Now we have multiple DEXs, 2 really big popular ones. And on one of the DEXs, you can use 5 different wallets. We're only a handful of months deep on even having a DEX. We've already got a DEX where you can use 5 different wallets. We don't have to worry about people not knowing where to turn if they can't use, a single MetaMask that's so popular. You can use 5 different wallets just with this one DEX. This is another example of that constant evolution, building, decentralization thing that I think is becoming sort of a central part of not just the architecture of the Cardano infrastructure, but also the way the ecosystem thinks about projects. I hope you're starting out a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.